In this video, Randy and I are going to talk about what's up, Randy? We're going to talk about, is it possible to enjoy a loving relationship in an anxious, avoidant relationship or dynamic? Now, what do I mean by that? I'm talking about a relationship where one partner tends to be more anxious or have more of an anxious, preoccupied attachment style, and one partner tends to have more of avoidant attachment style, and specifically thinking more of the dismissive avoidant attachment style. So we're going to assume that everybody watching has a basic understanding of attachment theory and attachment styles. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump into three big lessons or mindset shifts that do help create a loving relationship between someone with an anxious attachment style and an avoidant attachment style and helps both people become more secure. So I'm about to introduce Randy, and I'm going to tell you why we're here talking. But Randy and I met through a Facebook group that I created and run called Thriving Relationships. Now, when I started the group, it used to be a group for people with avoidant partners, and it has transformed into a broader group just about how to create thriving relationships where we can have secure love and authentic connection. And Randy has been a major contributor to that group. Randy and I both serve people who have insecure attachment styles and want to become more secure so that they can create loving relationships. And Randy, I'm finally getting to you, Randy. Randy has been able to do that in his own life. And because of that, and because of how much knowledge Randy has and experience Randy has, I wanted to take this opportunity to have a conversation and just to share some information that we're going to share primarily with members of the Thriving Relationships group, but perhaps others will even benefit as well. So, Randy, please take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Well, first and foremost, Daniel, I would like to thank you for having me here, for giving me this opportunity, this platform to come and speak on attachment's behalf to help overcome, clear up maybe some disconnects, misunderstandings, and help people ultimately thrive. So, with that being said, my name is Randy Kakame. I have been coaching for the better part of the past 10 years. This all came about due to me learning about attachment theory due to a failed relationship. At the end of the day, it was something that slapped me in the face, just like it does to most people. And it wasn't really something that I was trying to take full accountability for at first, initially. And we all know how hard that is. But over time, really kind of buckling down and doing the personal work on myself to understand myself, to understand my needs, to understand my wants, my boundaries, my standards. This put me on a fast track to being able to understand how to navigate my relationship with my partner. Yes, it was challenging initially due to the attachment patterns, but getting a coach myself and working through the process, it ultimately led me to success. Now it's been 10 years. Me and my partner haven't been happier. We're both secure. I work with people for the past 10 years doing this exact thing, helping them in the exact ways. And it's been pretty amazing.
That's awesome. And you have kids with your partner as well, right?
Yes, correct. We have three children, two of which are
Awesome.
autistic and very difficult.
Wow. Well, I mentioned that because anyone who has kids knows that that adds stress to a relationship and
Yes,
that it adds more, it becomes that much more important for the partners to work together as a team to be able to have a
yes,
successful relationship and a healthy family.
I couldn't agree more.
So Randy, before we jump into the three lessons, can we briefly just talk about some of the challenges people have before they understand their attachment styles and they're stuck in conflict? or they're stuck in some kind of difficulty or dissatisfaction in their relationship. Can you speak a little bit to what that looks like? Because I mean, I can tell you from my experience as well.
I mean, realistically, that looks like just wanting to be seen and heard and just not feeling as if that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Realistically, looking at the situation from such a detrimental perspective that there is no hope. But then at the same time, wanting hope so bad that it's eating you alive. At the end of the day, it probably was one of the most brutal things that I ever had to deal with because it was constant rejection, constant feeling rejected, constant feeling like I was going to be abandoned. And these were hardcore wounds personally for myself. They're hardcore wounds for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And every time they flared up, every time they got triggered, it was this huge just rush and wave of anxiety that just took over me and just cascaded my mind in so many different ways. It didn't essentially help, but I didn't realize that because I thought I was just being me. I thought I was just experiencing uh, my partner hurting me, essentially.
Right. Right.
Um, but this a lot of people experience those same things. So
Yeah. Yeah, I can speak to that from my own personal experience. And unfortunately, in my situation, I tried to get help. I was feeling I had an avoidant partner. I was in that relationship and I felt totally unwanted. I felt totally worthless because
yes,
why doesn't my partner want to have conversations to work through things with me? Why doesn't my partner want to spend more time with me or be fe affectionate with me? And I thought that I was, and I think one of your points is going to speak to this, but I thought that I was doing the right thing because I was reading books to try to find answers. I was going to therapists and professionals to try to find answers, and my partner was resisting those things. So I thought, hey, I'm here showing up to the relationship and my partner's not. And that thought process did not benefit me in that situation. And it was extremely painful. Unfortunately, that relationship ended before I learned about attachment theory, which really explained what had been going on and was extremely painful. And what I learned later was painful for her as well. Um, so I know from talking with you about your story and from the posts you've shared in the Thriving Relationships group that you have learned some lessons that have basically transformed the way that you approach your relationship, made it possible for you and your partner and wife, right? Because you're married, right?
correct.
Yeah, so for you and your wife to enjoy a more secure connection together, more love together, to raise your family together. So let's talk about just three big points that are big mindset shifts for people that will help people understand how they can go from having that disconnection and feeling really unfulfilled and rejected to enjoying that secure relationship.
Okay.
So give us one of the first big lessons you learned, Randy.
Well, the first huge lesson was probably going through the process of learning how to take personal responsibility for my own emotional experience. Um, Throughout my life, I went through the process of kind of experiencing these emotions and not being aware enough to understand that these emotions were being sprungboard from my own personal perspective of what's taking place around me. Sometimes, yeah, I was being hurt by people, and it was very easy and clear to see that. And sometimes I was felt emotionally hurt, and it wasn't so clear and easy to see where it was coming from. Um, I just knew that it involved someone. So, because I knew that it involved someone like my partner, I essentially went through the process of blaming her for these emotions that I was experiencing. And there was always some reasoning. She wasn't affectionate enough, or she didn't text me as often as I would like her to, or she didn't want to do date night whenever I was like, hey, let's do this. Um, I would always take those things very personally, and I would feel hurt. I would feel rejected. I would feel like I was going to be abandoned. And then I would blame her for those emotions. But in reality, those emotions were coming from my own narrative that I was spinning inside of myself. And this was something that I wasn't aware of, that I ultimately became aware of through working with my coach. It was a game changer to understand that I could stop in the moment and ask myself why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. It always led back to either something realistic that was taking place that I had ground to stand on to talk about, deal with, or it came back to a fear and insecurity. And every time it came back to that fear and insecurity for me, it allowed me to understand that this was coming from me. This wasn't necessarily coming from what's taking place. Maybe what's taking place isn't as bad as what I think is taking place. And that ultimately led a lot of things to become easier when dealing with my partner, because instead of me becoming emotionally reactive in the moment, I started becoming more conscientious. This ultimately put my partner in a safer position because she stopped expecting the emotional outburst and she started expecting more calm and steady interactions when those moments would come up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think personal responsibility was the biggest and most important lesson and shift that I had to learn. Um, because now when I have relationships with someone with more avoidant tendencies, it's not a problem anymore. It's very, but it was a problem before, and I totally agree. Going inside, understanding where are my emotions coming from, and taking
Yes,
responsibility from that rather than projecting, I'm feeling something that I don't like, therefore that person is to blame for it. Um,
correct.
so before somebody makes that shift, it can be really hard to understand. But once you
Yes,
make
it
that
can.
shift, it's like a light bulb goes on and it's life-changing.
Yes, yes.
So what else helped?
I'd probably have to say that the next big thing was understanding emotional resilience. At the end of the day, it's kind of like going to the gym. You've never been to the gym before, you go to the gym, you've never lifted weights, and realistically, you can lift 20 pounds, let's say. Well, in order for you to ultimately be able to lift more, you would have to continue to exercise those muscles. And at the end of the day, I like to think of our emotions as a muscle. If we never want to put ourselves in a position to experience something difficult, then that means that when something difficult happens that we're not in control of, we're not really going to be able to have the emotional bandwidth to withstand it from a stable perspective. It's going to cause us to become overwhelmed. It's going to cause us to become anxious. I mean, these are just normal things that happen. But if we're not used to experiencing difficulty, then when it does happen, it ultimately is a lot more difficult to walk through. So what I like to call it walking through the fire. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I made building my emotional resilience a huge goal of mine, where I ultimately put myself in positions that were difficult for me emotionally. I knew that they were going to be difficult. And I utilized those moments to take personal responsibility for my emotions and going through the process of being able to understand how I can navigate the situation. Uh, this was a huge game changer for me in my relationship. I mean, golly, this was like one of the biggest game changers because there were so many moments that were so painful. And like in these moments in the past, these are moments that I would try to run from, I would try to fight against. And what I started doing was I started just sitting and accepting what was taking place. I started sitting in the pain, and analyzing it and working through it so that I could come out the other side. Now I can proudly say that my armor is probably the thickest, strongest armor that I've ever had in my life. And that really goes a long way whenever you need to understand that something needs to be overcome and you're willing to sit in it in the right way to overcome it. That's difficult for a lot of people to do, and it's been game changer for me and my partner.
I love this discussion of emotional resilience. I think that's very important. And I love the analogy you used of going to the gym. And when we think we can only do so much, but we can actually do a lot more and we can grow and do more over time. One of the
100%.
situations um, where I see this come up a lot is one partner will want to discuss an issue. There's an empathic rupture, somebody's upset, somebody's hurt about something. One partner wants to discuss the issue and resolve it right away, and the
Yeah,
other
yeah,
partner feels overwhelmed or emotionally flooded, and they pull away from that situation. So that's the classic anxious avoidant dynamic. And so I was the one in the relationship that caused me to learn about attachment theory. I was the one who wanted to discuss it and get to the bottom of it and resolve it quickly. And for me, so building emotional resilience meant I sit in the discomfort of not having it resolved right away and just practice that, right?
yes.
Is that experience something that you see a lot as well?
Oh, yes. I mean, realistically, a lot of the people that I work with experience this constant, consistent, incessant nagging to figure out and fix as soon as possible. And it's that kind of push to fix that is really sparking this level of uncomfortability in the relationship, in ourselves. It's anxiety within ourselves that we
Yes.
need to overcome this thing so that this doesn't implode any further. But it's that push to need to overcome it that always ends up creating a level of uncomfortability, which ends up choking out emotional intimacy. And if people only knew how important emotional intimacy was, that'll be for another video, they would understand just how important going through the process of taking some time to really level yourself out before approaching your partner or really approaching anybody in a social dynamic realistically could do wonders for the conversation, the solution finding, the relationship building. It just goes a long way when people are able to approach things from a less heightened state.
Yeah, absolutely. So great opportunity there. So when I was in that situation, great opportunity for me to take personal responsibility for my anxiety and then to sit in the discomfort of my anxiety and build my resilience, the emotional resilience.
100%. Yes.
Now, for those folks who are anxious, who are watching this, and they're thinking, yeah, well, what about the avoidant partner? What should they be doing? Now
Mm,
they can also come back to the difficult conversation, which is
correct.
going to require them to get uncomfortable and build their emotional resilience.
Correct.
Yeah,
And at the end of the day, it doesn't work. At the end of the day, it doesn't work without both people doing a level of the work. But each person's work looks different than the other person's work because each person's work is about their own process. And going through the process of needing 15 minutes before continuing a conversation is 100% healthy. It is not unhealthy to need to gather yourself or to need to take space from a situation as long as we're always able to come back and make it possible, work out solutions. A lot of times, a lot of avoidant people, are afraid to come back to the conversation because usually in these situations or dynamics, there's a lot of seemingly judgment, criticism, and shaming. At the end of the day, if we can stay away from those three topics, what would essentially happen is the avoidant person would feel more comfortable to engage in the conversation. And that was something that really helped me bridge gaps with my partner. You know, the level of taking responsibility for myself and how I felt, the level of going through the process of being emotionally resilient and learning how to sit in those uncomfortable emotions really gave me that ability to go the distance with my partner in these very ways where I was able to cut things like blaming, shaming out of the picture. And that essentially opened my partner up to more of an ability to deal with what we were dealing with, even if it was hard or difficult.
Yeah, very powerful. So let's talk about your third point, and we'll end with that point.
Okay. You know, probably, I mean, these are all three par what and what. Uh, Being a positive inspiration is, God, at the end of the day, we all have a superpower, and that is to literally inspire people around us. This inspiration could look positive, this inspiration could look negative. Understanding how to go through the process of projecting a positive sense of self, no, not toxic positivity, just a positive sense of self where you can understand your limits and your capabilities and accept that, where you can look at yourself in the mirror and you can say, I'm okay with myself, where you can go through the process of going to work and understanding that you can do a certain level of work and it's hard to do more. Okay, it's okay. It's okay that we have insecurities. It's okay that we have fears. It's okay. Being okay with these things literally puts us in a mind frame where we can accept ourselves. In accepting ourselves, we ultimately put ourselves in a comfortable position to just kind of live our life from a very positive/neutral narrative that isn't really jagged or heightened around anxiety and emotional insecurity and feeling just burnt out all the time from how heavy everything always feels. God, I lived that way for so long. Um, but realistically, I kind of realized that by living that way for so long, I wasn't really positively inspiring my partner. My partner wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. Nobody was happy. There had to be a level of happiness created and generated. And since I was going through the process of doing the work, I put the work and time and effort into myself to put myself in a better place where it wasn't necessarily my partner's job to make me happy. I learned how to make myself happy. And this put such a positive spin on my relationship because my partner started enjoying me as a person. You know, that's what ultimately built our relationship was actually getting to a place where my partner felt like I was her partner. And it's because of
Yeah,
things like being inspired.
yeah, phenomenal. I think that seems to me to be a human condition. It's not an anxious trait or an avoidant trait, but all humans have a tendency to take a negative outlook. An example I use is the missing tile syndrome, where if you look up at a ceiling and there's 100 tiles and one is missing, what do you notice?
The one
You
that's
know,
missing.
you notice the one, not the 99 that are there. You notice the one that's missing. And when we can shift our mindset to be more positive, like you said, that's so powerful. And there was more depth in there as well. It was not just shifting to be more positive, but you talked about taking responsibility for your own happiness so that you become a partner who is more enjoyable to be around. Is that a fair way to put it?
100%. That's a very fair way to put it. I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to be with somebody who makes us feel good. And if I had to be honest about who I used to be, I mean, yeah, it sucks that that's who I used to be, but I used to be a gray cloud. And I understand why my partner wasn't really inspired by me. And, there's a lot of things that people go through from the attachment side that's dealing with shame, dealing with guilt, dealing with insecurity, dealing with fear. We can't go through the process of constantly trying to block hearing things like we have to take responsibility or I'm not living up to my full potential that a person may want. If we were willing to listen to those things, if we were willing to hear those things out and actually look at them and try to do something about them, we would essentially become the version of ourselves that we already have the ability to be, but it's the version of ourselves that people around us actually feel inspired by.
Yeah.
And that is what can make them and us both feel loved and cared for.
Yeah. Yeah, something you said spoke to me because my struggle, I was very perfectionistic, and the reason why I thought that I had to be great at work, I had to be physically fit, I had to be perfect in all these different ways, learn all the best communication methods so that I could communicate perfectly and be perfect in all these ways and be the perfect husband. And that ultimately put me under so much stress. Oh, and the reason why I was doing it was to try to get her to validate me. If I could be
No,
perfect, then she would validate me and she wouldn't have these complaints about my defects that
correct,
I didn't want to acknowledge.
correct.
And that is not a fun person to be around.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. That's how it really was on a daily basis.
And so here's the beautiful thing that I'm getting from what you just shared, which is that a human being is not perfect and
No,
who's actually more enjoyable to be around is someone who's authentic,
yes,
who can acknowledge I'm a human being and I'm not perfect and I make mistakes just like everybody else.
yes,
So
100%, man.
yeah, that was huge for me too. Um so I appreciate the inspiration that you're sharing right now. So I think we'll end on that point. And I hope this helps people. Randy, do you have time for one more question?
Sure, of course.
Okay, here's one question because I'm just thinking about the folks who are watching, um, and s some people seem to be in a relationship where there are anxious avoidant dynamics, where ultimately the healthiest thing might be to leave the
Okay.
relationship. Or at some point, you have some boundaries and you say, look, this relationship isn't meeting my needs and it might be best to leave. Do you have, any thoughts about either how to determine when it's right to leave or just to encourage somebody who might be in that situation?
So what I do is I get my clients to do this exercise called the four-leaf clover. And essentially what this is, it's my lucky charm. It can be everybody's lucky charm. Uh, you sit down, take a piece of paper, and draw a four-leaf clover. In each of the sections of the clover, you write out a different list of standards, wants, needs, and boundaries. A lot of people, when they sit down to write these lists out, they draw a blank. This means that you don't know what would actually work for you. Because you
Right.
don't know what's going to work for you, that means that you can't go through the process of making choices and decisions in the moment based on narratives and information that you don't have. The first thing to do would be to figure out what each of those lists are for you.
Yeah.
If you do know what each of those lists are and you are able to write them down, then what you need to do is you need to go through the process of comparing these lists to the person you're in a relationship with.
Yeah.
If 75% of these lists are being met, then for the most part, you're in a situation where things can work the way that you want them to. And through healing, working together, finding ways to bridge disconnects, a lot can happen. It really can. I see it all the time. It happens all the time. But if only 25% of your lists are being met, you're essentially in a situation that you need to take yourself out of. And I know that that sucks sometimes for people to have to kind of confront being alone or go through the process of not wanting to believe that the narrative they've built in their head isn't possible. But when you actually have credible proof and evidence sitting right in front of you, where you have a list of needs, you have a list of boundaries, and you can clearly see that this person is not meeting these things, you are not worth that. You're worth almost every single thing on those lists being met. There's one thing, if you didn't hear anything I said today through this video, the one thing you need to hear me say is that you are worth what you want, but you have to be willing to take personal responsibility. You have to be able to understand what it looks like to realistically know yourself. And you have to be willing to follow what you yourself want. And if being in a relationship with somebody that's not going to give you what you want is what you want, then you're fine. But if that's not what you want, walking away from those relationships, no matter how hard it is, you have to do it.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I have a similar list that I use with my clients as well. And it's affirming to hear that you use a similar method. And it's powerful. This can be one of the most challenging parts of the process because one of the beautiful it's so hard to know whether the relationship can become that secure, loving relationship that you want or not. And it's a process to learn and to see what works. When it does work, it's a beautiful opportunity for us to both grow. You know, both parties grow and both
100%.
parties get to work through their past emotional wounds, their triggers, to grow as people. And it can be really, really wonderful. So I never write off an anxious avoidant relationship. Um, those opportunities. And I appreciate the work you're doing, Randy.
100%. I appreciate the work that you're doing, man. I mean,
Cool.
realistically, we got to understand, just to tag on what you said, for the people that are listening, you have to understand that at least I'd probably say 80% of these dynamics are really worth saving.
Yeah.
Simply because there is so much growth that comes from these dynamics. My partner is probably the thing in my life that I'd probably have to say is the most important because it was the relationship with her that was the catalyst for me becoming who I became.
Yeah.
And that in itself means more than anything because my life is now 10x more than it had ever been from the narrative that I was looking at things from before, where I was very limited. I didn't believe that I was capable of anything. I had no opportunity for anything. And I needed other people to make me feel like I had a sense of worth and value. It was because the relationship with my partner went down the drain for a while that I ultimately was able to find and understand my worth and value. That in itself is worth being going through the difficulties that we went through. So if you're in an anxious avoidant relationship, take the opportunity to heal before you do anything else because you will be able to see so many different things than you had ever seen before in these moments if you're able to see yourself from that different place as well.
That is so powerful, Randy. Awesome. You know, I agree with you. you and I are both on the same mission, and this is a really powerful conversation that we can share with people. So, for folks who are watching, you can find me or Randy through our Facebook profiles. You can interact with us in the Thriving Relationships Facebook group, and we really look forward to sharing this conversation.
It's been great.
All right, thanks, Randy. We'll do it again.
Yeah, have a great evening.
Have a good
Bye.
evening.